All right, we are unlocking the truth about why people in the Bible live so long. I gave this I tried to give it a succinct title. I came up with antediluvian lifespans. I guess that's what, that just fits in the topic just a little bit better. As you can see, I've got a topic list over here, and a whole sentence wouldn't fit very well. So I tried to shorten it a little bit. Antediluvian, for those of you that aren't familiar, basically just means the time before the flood. Diluvian kind of comes from the term deluge. And in a few, I don't know how long ago, but it was several weeks ago, we had a conversation about how the Cherokees had a myth about the flood that was very similar to Noah's flood. That one is titled The Deluge. And in that one, a guy is talking to a dog. The dog says a flood's coming, it's going to kill everybody. And to prove that he's not lying, the dog says, check my neck. And the guy feels the dog's neck, and it has bones sticking out along its spine. I have no idea why that proves he's not lying, but for some reason the guy knew that he was telling the truth. Apparently, after the floodwaters dissipate, he goes over and looks in the valley on the other side, and it's full of bones of all the people that had been killed by the flood. And I think that's kind of interesting. They say a lot of different cultures have myths about floods. I didn't really concentrate on that this time. This time we're just talking about, why did they live so long? Why did the people before the flood live so long? So this is a table of contents of some of the things I found in my research. We're going to cover Genesis 5, Genesis 6:3, Genesis 1, chapter 7 through verse 7 through 9, and some of the other questions that we ask on the show today is, what if their years were months? I heard some people think that maybe the time was different back then. Maybe years weren't really years. We're going to explore that idea. The flip side of that question is, why do we only live 120 years maximum? And then another question is, were Adam and Eve giants? What is the firmament? And we talked about the atmosphere being different, possibly. If there's a bunch of oxygen in the atmosphere, or too much oxygen, they call that hyperoxia. If there's a normal amount of oxygen, they call it normoxia. And if there's not enough, they call it hypoxia. And we're going to talk about those three different things and what effects that might have. I looked at some scientific studies. And then we're going to talk about a theory that I came across about exponential decay, which has a lot to do with carbon-14 dating. And I'd like to ask you guys the question, who is Methuselah? Because that has to do with the question of what if the years were months? We'll talk about how we can tell that that's not the case, and it has to do with Methuselah. Rethinking the evolutionary model. We're going to talk about evolution just a little bit, and how people today, the scientists today, are starting to redraw that whole model. The whole picture of us coming from monkeys is not really what they're teaching now. Then I wanted to talk a little bit about what Robert touched on last week, the Sumerian kings list. I'm not sure if I found the same one that you were talking about. I had a hard time finding it. We may have to look up. You were talking about a king's list that might have been found that spanned 250,000 years or something like that.
Yeah, like 8 kings or something, but I completely forgot about it till you just mentioned it.
I've heard of something similar in Egypt, but I had a hard time finding that as well. I heard about it on a video, and when I looked it up, I couldn't really find it. There supposedly is a hall of kings that date the whole history of the Egyptians, and it supposedly goes back way further than anything that we have in our current textbooks. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about is giants. Again, at the bottom, there's some stuff from art history that I remember learning in college called hierarchical proportion. And I think it'll help dispel a lot of misconceptions people have about ancient artifacts. Today, with TikTok and everything, it is so hard to discern what's real and what's not. The news is even worse. I flip through the news. I watch YouTube news. I watch just clips on the news on YouTube, and there's never anything new. Everything, even if something totally crazy happens, it's still like with Hillary Clinton, for instance. Yeah, they can say people are getting indicted, but we've been hearing that for so long. Like none of this is new.
And it'll be, if anybody gets indicted, it'll be people you've never heard of,
Right?
like somebody's assistant secretary.
And even with Ukraine, I've stopped paying attention to Ukraine because almost every day it's all propaganda. You don't even, none of it, you have no idea what any of it, if any of it's even true. So why listen to it?
Yeah. That's like when you watch stuff on these TikTok videos, everything is like, if it is something that pertains to history, I don't even believe a word they say till I look at it. I go looking up the information. And it's like there's a lot of doctors that do reviews of those, and they'll be like, I've watched some of these doctors, like, don't listen to a word those people are saying, reviewing videos. Like, this person is an idiot, will get you sick or hurt.
Well, I even just on little stuff, like I was watching a guy doing a boxing video where he was trying to teach people how to punch, and he's telling them, come around like this and don't turn your hand, and just turn like this and hit, and don't turn your hand because it's faster. Because if you turn your hand like this, then it's going to take longer. And he's saying, if you hit like this, you won't break your hand. If you do turn like this, you will break your hand. And my dad always taught me the exact opposite. If you turn your hand like this, you're using different bones right here. You're not going to break your hand. And whenever you twist the wrist, it's like throwing a baseball. You come across, you're turning their face. You're like, if you're punching like a punching bag or something really softly, maybe you would do that. But this will break your hand for sure.
But if you think about when we were kids and we played baseball or t-ball, we were taught a way to hold that bat and to swing that bat. When my daughter played baseball, the coach was teaching her, line the knuckles up. You swing that bat, line the knuckles up. Now, I've seen these TikTok videos where they're showing all kinds of wild stuff with like a kid holding the broom, like sweep the floor, another one holding like a ball. There's things that they're doing now we would never have dreamed of back then. So maybe the boxing things evolved.
My dad always came up with crazy stuff like that, where he had this one exercise in baseball where you had to take a wiffle ball bat and you stuck a sock on top of a doorknob, and you'd put a can behind your pop can behind your foot, and you had to swing the bat, the bat had to be your bat length away from the wall, and you had to swing without hitting the wall, knock the sock off the doorknob, and kick the can all at the same time.
Yeah.
And if you did that, you had perfect form.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It's evolved into like household appliances and all kinds of other crap.
Everybody's an expert.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's great. You if you stay on there long enough, you'll hear every single argument sworn like it's the gospel. And they'll all be opposite each other. 1 minute our water's full of snake venom. Next minute we got uranium in there.
Oh yeah. Well, I'll tell you this, whenever we had my son, when he was a baby, all the best information out there was don't ever give your baby water in their baby bottle. Only feed them formula. And so we did that. Fine. My daughter, a year and a half later, give your babies water out of their bottle. They need the water.
Yeah.
Don't prohibit them. I mean, the exact same experts, were going back and forth. So just a year and a half, things changed.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't that long ago that they were pulling eggs off of the salad bar at schools because
Yeah.
it's too many calories, and they turn around and hand you a waffle with syrup all over it, and it's just like, and their rules are crazy. They never follow their own rules, and now they're giving hard-boiled eggs left and right. I don't understand from year.
Well, that was during the Obama administration when his wife went on that kick about school lunches.
Well,
our
let's make
kid,
it where no one will eat it, and it will all get thrown in the trash, and we'll waste 60 billion tons of food every year.
and your kids are still going home hungry.
Yeah. Every kid was mad.
They sure
Yeah.
fed the hogs wherever all the trash went. Have you guys ever had a wheat anything from the school? They have no flour whatsoever. They don't use any salt. So you have to eat bread that's just made of wheat flour, no salt.
Oh,
How many of
no.
you are going to eat that?
Yeah, that sounds like
On your hamburger, on your pizza, everything. I mean, they just garbage. They had the Obama, like Michelle Obama's main claim to fame should be just feeding hogs and landfills across the country.
Yeah.
All right, so I wanted to start off by just doing a little biblical reading here. Genesis 5 is where you can find the line of Adam. These are all the people that came after Adam. The descendants of Adam. Genesis 5. This is a written account of Adam's family line. When God created mankind, he made them in the likeness of God. He created them male and female and blessed them. And he named them mankind. I'm not sure what translation this is. When they were created, when Adam had lived 130 years, he had a son in his own likeness, in his own image, and he named him Seth. After Seth was born, Adam lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Adam lived a total of 930 years, and then he died. Isn't that peculiar that they don't say anything about his death?
Yeah, he was 130 years old before he had Seth.
Yeah. When Seth had lived 105 years, he became the father of Enosh. After he became the father of Enosh, Seth lived 807 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Seth lived a total of 912 years, and then he died. When Enosh had lived 90 years, he became the father of Kenan. After he became the father of Kenan, Enosh lived 815 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Enosh lived a total of 905 years, and then he died. When Kenan had lived 70 years, he became the father of Mahalalel. After he became the father of that guy, Kenan lived 840 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Kenan lived a total of 910 years, and then he died. When Mahalalel had lived 65 years, he became the father of Jared. After he became the father of Jared, Mahalalel lived 830 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, that guy lived a total of 895 years, and then he died. When Jared had lived 162 years, he became the father of Enoch. After he became the father of Enoch, Jared lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Jared lived a total of 962 years, and then he died. So all these people had to have known each other. They're having children when they're only like 60 years old, and then they're living like 800 years past that. So Adam had to have known, maybe not Noah, but he had to have known Enoch. So all these people would have known each other. When Enoch had lived 65 years, he became the father of Methuselah. After he became the father of Methuselah, Enoch walked faithfully with God 300 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Enoch lived a total of 365 years. Enoch walked faithfully with God, and then he was no more because God took him away.
Enoch was like the other person in the Bible that didn't die.
Yeah, he was taken up in a chariot of fire or something, wasn't he?
No, that was Elijah.
Elijah.
Not confused with
Enoch
Elijah. We had that conversation.
Yeah, Elijah and Elisha. Yeah, we did that show. So let's look that up real quick. How did Enoch die? I don't think it says.
It doesn't.
Yeah, took him away, caused him to die before his time. When Methuselah had lived 187 years, he became the father of Lamech. After he became the father of Lamech, Methuselah lived 782 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Methuselah lived a total of 969 years, and then he died. When Lamech had lived 182 years, he had a son. He named him Noah and said, "He will comfort us in the labor and a painful toil of our hands caused by the ground the Lord has cursed." After Noah was born, Lamech lived 595 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Lamech lived a total of 777 years, and then he died. After Noah was 500 years old, he became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
Another thing that they don't mention in here and is whether or not their spouses lived that long. Or if they had multiple spouses. Or if it's
I know
just
some
a
guys
matter
probably feel like they live hundreds of years with their wife.
feels like 5 minutes underwater. Or is it just, as the writing of this, it wasn't important for them to include the women. But they don't mention really the wives except Eve and maybe Noah's wife and daughters.
I think they mentioned that Eve dies, but they don't say how.
Yeah.
I think I saw that somewhere.
Because that would be interesting if this is literal. Did only the men live that long because they were descendants of Adam? Or did their spouses also live that long? Or did it,
Speaking of TikTok, I remember seeing the TikTok that basically showed that each one of these names meant something in Hebrew. And if you lined them all up, it made a sentence that basically said that Jesus would come and die for our sins.
I was on Facebook the other day, and this guy had made a comment about, the history after the flood, and he even wrote a book about it, and talked about like Noah's descendants and stuff. But before that, I don't remember ever hearing anything about any of the wives, and never mentions how long they lived.
In one of the books, they talk about Adam having another wife, Lilith, but she came before Eve. But I don't know what book that came from.
I think that comes more from like, the Wiccan side of people who follow Wicca and witchcraft and stuff. They believe hard into Lilith as the before Eve.
Let's see what book that comes from. Jewish religious figure Lilith, Mesopotamian Judaic mythology. It says supposed. In the book of Adam and Eve, in the Zohar, Leviticus, it says a hot, fiery female who first cohabited with man. In Leviticus 19. Maybe we'll have to do something on that later in another show. Here's a timeline.
Or does this fall into the sons of God marrying the daughters of man?
I don't know. I'm
You know, kind of explaining how some of these male figures live so long. Maybe bloodline.
usually they
That
refer to the
passage,
sons of man, not sons of God, usually, isn't it?
the passage he's talking about is, I think that's found after the flood, where
Hmm.
the supposed half angel, half human beings.
We're not talking about the Nephilim.
I think that
Well,
passage comes after the flood, though, right?
I thought the flood killed the
maybe.
Nephilim. Isn't that
Just
isn't that the reason
just
he said
a
the flood?
I may be wrong. Yeah, I may be.
just a
I was
theory
thinking that.
thrown out, you know,
Okay.
because of why the men would have lived so long.
Yeah.
What were the Anunnaki?
I got
You
a little
remember?
Anunnaki. I think that was Sumerian gods, which is
Because
where
that's
Abraham was from.
well, I re-looked up some of that Sumerian kings, and this one article I found was like found in Sumerian cuneiform tablets. The ancient Sumerian kings list suggests that humanity is over 266,000 years old, with rulers spanning over thousands of years. If these Anunnaki kings were human, is it possible we could have evolved to live expanded lifespans?
Here's a picture of that Sumerian king list. And in that one, I got a little interpretation here, and it says lines 1 through 39, which I'm assuming would be over here, is about before the flood, and it says the rest of it is after the flood. So this is a king's list that goes before and after. And this has something to do right here. It talks about Gilgamesh, Sargon of Akkad. If you've ever seen this before, this is a stele from Acadia, which would be modern day Assyria, northern Iraq. This is Naram Sin. He is considered to be one of the first kings. And that's where it's talking about. It shows it right here, Sargon of Akkad. This is Sargon of Akkad here. One thing, most people show this and they say that he's a giant because he's so big compared to these other people. But in art school, we learned about something called visual hierarchy. And basically what they concluded, what the Egyptologists say, is that these people are bigger because they're more important. And so the slaves would be little. Like the smaller you are, the less important you are. And that's called hierarchical proportion. And that's just an art term that basically says the least important thing will be the smallest and the most important thing will be the biggest. Most ancient art was this way. Even the Chinese, in Chinese art, they would draw people that were bigger, that were more important. The emperor would be large and everyone else would be small. It's pretty common across most ancient art that the king is bigger. So it doesn't necessarily mean that he's a giant. The model we were talking about, the model where we came from apes. People are now starting to rethink all that because they found Denisovans up in Siberia. You probably heard about this if you watched much conspiracy theory stuff. I think they did an Ancient Aliens episode about it. They found a new species of people up in Siberia. They did DNA testing on them, and they didn't match up with Neanderthals or modern humans. So there's missing links being found all the time that say, and they don't seem to be So the Denisovans had nothing to do with Neanderthals, as what this chart shows. The Neanderthals interbred with humans, Denisovans interbred with humans.
Humans being the Homo sapiens.
And there's a potential unknown hominid we still haven't discovered yet.
I think I heard some just the other day, reading an article about how they think that there may have been some interbreeding between Denisovans and Neanderthals. I mean, I just read it like maybe last week.
And none of them seem to be the Homo erectus that they found in Africa. I saw a video where this guy was talking about the Lucy that they found back in the 70s. That guy's research grant was about to run out, and like he got down to where he had like 2 weeks until his money ran out, and all of a sudden
so he had to find
came up with some bones all of a sudden, and he got his grant again.
Yeah, apparently that happens a lot. Like I've heard people talk too, is like when these people are doing research about ancient artifacts, ancient this or that, it's like if they start finding that their research is wrong, like their theories were wrong, the people who are paying them to find this out, the information they're wanting, they start finding out that it's wrong and it's going a different direction, they lose their grant money real fast.
That and I think that's one of the big problems with our society today is everything's based on getting funding next time. As a teacher, I know there's a lot of waste that goes on. I know I haven't seen it in years, but when I was a librarian back around 2010, 2012, I was getting a budget back then, and I haven't had a budget since. But back then I had a budget, and you get, as a librarian, you get like $6-7 per kid, and it's automatically figured in. That money goes towards buying books. And if you don't spend the money, you don't get the money next time. So it's very important you spend the money. Nobody cares what you spend the money on, but you better spend that money though. And there were several times I spent the money and it ended up getting put in the closet, and I got a different position, and all that stuff just sat in the closet for probably a decade. I bet they still haven't opened it. I bought a brand new airbrush and I bet no one ever used it. It's probably still collecting dust.
But that's every business. If you don't use the budget, then you don't need it.
Another thing that's a problem with our society, I used to see it when I was in college. Whenever I was in college, they were basically, it was teaching people to be ambulance chasers. As long as you could find a problem, you could make a lawsuit and you could make millions for yourself. And it seemed like back in the early 2000s, that's all anybody was trying to do in college, is find somebody to sue. Find somebody to sue. And that's your career. That's what you build your career on, is a lawsuit.
You're talking about like college and stuff. You know, when we were kids in high school, that's all they told us. You have to go to college. I was watching one of those TikTok videos, and this person was a teacher. And part of which I think it was a guy applying for a job. They're like, you know, part of this is we want you to push college. And he's like, I can't do that. It's not right. Because too many of these kids don't need that or want it. You know, not enough people pushing trade schools.
Yeah, I agree. Not every kid needs it. I think that's part of the problem with high schools is a lot of these kids are wasting their time because the people have decided what the curriculum should be. And there's certain things you have to hit, certain criteria you have to hit. And it feels like a lot of people are just going through the motions instead of authentically trying to teach these kids what they know. And I think that I'm guilty of it myself. Trying to teach from a textbook is that whole era is dead. You just can't even handing out worksheets and stuff. If you're doing that, nobody's learning from you.
But it's also kind of like what we're doing here. You know, we're trying to find more information we were never taught. find answers to questions we've always had.
Well, institutions intentionally keep information from you because it helps keep their model of reality going. I remember whenever I was taking,
Yeah.
Just said control.
I remember whenever I was in my freshman year of college, I was taking a jewelry class, and I was making a bracelet out of silver and turquoise, and I was learning to be a silversmith. And there was a certain technique I needed to know in order to make the piece I was wanting to make. And I asked my teacher, how do I do this? And he said, well, you enroll in the next class, and then I teach you in that class. I'm not teaching you that until you pay, basically. And it was the same way in graphic design school. Same thing. They teach you. They give you all these assignments, and they're intentionally very difficult because you have no idea how to run the software, and you struggle for like 6 months to try to figure out how to run the software yourself. And it was a real pain to try to figure it out by yourself. And then they have a workshop halfway through your career, and they teach you how to use the software on this one day workshop, and they charge you like $800, and they intentionally slow walk you through each little step for 2 days. And the one thing that you need to know in order to make everything work, they teach you that the last hour of the workshop, so to make you stay there the whole time. And it's like, man, if they would have taught you step 15 the first 30 minutes, you could have just left.
Yeah. Well, how many times have you been to a conference and you hear the speaker and he tells you to buy this book and it'll tell you exactly how to do this?
You see that.
That was my when I took my B water license. Their instructor was like, hey, come up here and read these books from the university. They're all the books that we follow for all of our water stuff in the entire country comes from like the University of California. And he's like, come up here and read these. I thought he was peddling the books to buy. It's like, no, there was information in those books we desperately needed because he was intentionally not putting that information in our study guides for our test. He's like, come up and read these books. You should read these books.
It's all about just knowing what words look up. Anyone could teach themselves, but you don't know the key words to put in. Like, what's the right question? That's the real thing you got to put into people's minds. You don't need to teach people the answers. You need to tell them the right questions to ask. Just like with this topic we're talking about right now. How do you find out whether or not the atmosphere was different back then? You got to have certain terminology like hyperoxia. That's a real thing, and it has real effects on whether or not things are bigger or not. Like right here, you can see this chart right here. This alligator on the bottom is much bigger than that small alligator. And there's a company in Europe that's buying all these eggs and putting them in incubators that have extra oxygen. They got another one that's got normal oxygen. They got another one that has no oxygen or very little oxygen. And this little baby one here, this one had not enough oxygen. And basically, in order to breathe, its organs have to work overtime, and it ends up having a huge heart and a tiny little body. And you can see its organs are all swollen in comparison to the rest of its body. And then the one down below, basically the way it works is the oxygen is richer. Like when you go inside the amber fossils that they have of mosquitoes, and they have little bubbles in there, like on Jurassic Park, when they test that oxygen in there, it actually is more oxygenated than what we have now. It's possibly 23% more oxygen in an oxygen molecule than we have now. And it's decreasing. The amount of oxygen on the earth is apparently decreasing the percentage wise in each molecule. And apparently in dinosaur times, there was a lot more oxygen in there. That's why they had a problem when they were looking at the Brontosaurus, because it's got this massive body, but its nostrils up on top of its head are the size of a normal horse. And they're like, they said that if an animal that big was breathing in through just those two holes, it would cause so much friction going down their nostrils that they would basically combust. That's a lot of heat being
Wow.
generated through nostrils.
Well, that too is like at that time, millions of years ago, there have been completely different plants. I've watched documentaries about like, as the world goes on now, they suspect that, in tens of thousands of millions of years from now, there'll be a lot more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which will encourage more plant growth, but probably most likely different kinds of plant. Plants that grow faster like bamboo and different grasses like that. But that's like, talking about like pre-flood. If we theorize that like the flood happened, the flood was part of the ice age, the ending of the ice age. Massive, ice dams busting all over the world, different things like that. At the peak of the ice age, the sea levels were 300 or 400 feet lower. That means their salinity level was like, I can't remember the percentage, but it was great. It was a great deal higher. And that surely would affect the amount of, rain and oxygen in the atmosphere as well. So, when you think about like the land animals, all the land mammals were much larger. All the different mammoths, mastodons, giant sloths, giant bears, lions all over. We had a lot bigger mammals at that time. So even just 12 to 100,000 years ago,
Here's another
if
study.
we had more.
Here's another study right here about gar. They did the same thing with gar, giving them more oxygen. And the gar, you can see the difference in them. Then right here, we can see tomatoes that have CO2, pressurized CO2. Supposedly, these pressurized CO2 tomatoes can get up to like 40 feet high. And they have to have like scaffolding to hold it up. And they apparently produce like 15,000 tomatoes on one plant.
So in your research, is this kind of coming from what some people call like the canopy theory? Is that kind of what you're leaning towards on that or something? I mean, I saw that too.
I think that canopy theory can be interpreted two different ways. There's a biblical canopy theory, and then there's like the science canopy theory. Canopy theory is basically like that we had greenhouse gases trapped here in the earth, and that could have been because of, well, volcanic ash covering the earth, they say, makes an ice age. So that wouldn't, you can't have an ice age and have the canopy theory at the same time. But in the Bible, it talks about the firmament and the waters being separated from the waters. And there's a lot of conjecture about what that means. But one of the theories that I came across was that people believed that there was basically an ice shield over the top of it was like an ice dome. It's the flat earth type of thing, where they've got an ice dome over the whole world, and that there was basically higher pressure underneath the ice, and there was water up above the ice, and it broke loose, and the water from above came down and flooded the earth. To me, none of that makes a lick of sense. But I did come across something interesting about that. Here, this is an Apologetics Press article about Genesis 1:6. And I thought it was interesting what they said about it. In this picture, you can see not in all, some of them, the word firmament's not there. The word firmament is in the King James Version. But in the Hebrew, they called it rakia. The typical interpretation of rakia and heaven in Genesis 1:6 is that God created the sky on day 2 separating water vapor in the sky, clouds, from liquid water. Most commentators and translators support this interpretation. Various creation scientists have theorized that the waters above the firmament were not the sky, but rather formed a water canopy like a bubble that burst at the flood. The idea is attractive as the greenhouse effect that would be generated helps theoretically to explain, for example, the long lifespans of the patriarchs of Genesis 5. While the theory has strengths, its weaknesses have caused it to fall on hard times. Another thing that I saw talked about how there was no rain. Some people think that there was no rain before the flood. And some people theorize that basically rain as we know it now didn't exist yet, that it was basically water vapor that traveled all over the earth. And there wasn't really storm clouds yet at that time. God then defined Rekia as heavens. Shamayim, however, was used in 3 different distinct ways by the Hebrews and by God through his inspired spokesman. It could mean the sky or atmosphere where the birds fly and the clouds gather. It could mean outer space where the stars are situated. Psalm 19:4-6, Isaiah 13:10, and Genesis 1-14 is where they talk about this. It could also mean the place where God dwells. Context must be used to determine which heaven is referenced. This is the part that I was wanting to get to. The translation firmament, however, is not so much a translation of the original Hebrew term as it is a transliteration of a term used in the Latin Vulgate, firmamentum, which was translated from Greek Septuagint term stereoma that was used for the Hebrew rakia. The uninspired translators of the Septuagint, who were translating for the Egyptian pharaoh in Egypt, were apparently influenced by the then conventional belief in Egypt that the heavens are a stone vault. The Hebrew term rakia, however, does not suggest such a meaning. Rather, it refers to something that has been stretched, spread, or beaten out like metal. The idea is that on day 2, God divided the waters of earth, spreading them out from one another and moving some above the earth and creating that which holds those waters apart, much like what a solid would do.
Huh.
So are they thinking that the water's not the clouds are not, I think they're saying clouds are water. I think, and I'm thinking they're thinking that instead of the clouds flying in the air, that they're being lifted up by something. I don't know. I just get that feeling from what I read there.
Beyond me.
Yeah.
So, okay. So what did we end up deciding here about why they stopped living so long?
Well, I'm gonna get to this one chart right here. That's a perfect way to look at this. So here's us now, below 200 years, right? One theory that I saw was about exponential decay. Here's a model of decay of a carbon-14 molecule, which I use to date things. Look how this up here is the lifespan of Methuselah, just under 1,000 years. As you move through the Bible and you chart how old they are and when they died, the chart perfectly matches the decay of a carbon-14 atom. And this chart is this is the reduction of their lifespan over time. And the theory that I came across basically shows that this is impossible to fake. In order to fake this, if these times aren't real, then that means that the people writing the Bible over the course of thousands of years had some kind of secret mathematical knowledge conspiracy that they had to maintain verbally over thousands of years, because this stuff wasn't written down till later. So they had to have had a second verbal key to unlock all this stuff in order for that conspiracy to work. So basically, it is absolutely impossible mathematically that they were able to create a perfect model of exponential decay. So according to science and mathematicians, it is impossible to have those numbers form this chart right here.
Yeah.
I mean, it does, and to fake it would have been impossible. You'd had to have been a super genius and pass that information secretly down through thousands of years in order to pull off that formula.
I was reading an article earlier before we started about, like, you know, it was from some other website that was more biblically based. And they were talking about one theory that some people have had was that basically with Adam being the first man, the perfection, you know, created in God's image, then after that creation, there was sin. And with sin caused decay. Kind of like what you're talking about. And that every generation after Adam has progressively gotten, you know, they've lost wherever that element is of God's grace or perfection. And it hit a point where, you know, like I noticed you had that written down for Genesis 6:3. You know, men are mortals and they're only going to have 600, or they're only going to live for 120 years. You know, that decay started right after Adam. You know, and then every generation gets lower and lower and lower until you basically plateau out.
I'll just go ahead and read that. And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, and they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh. Yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children unto them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast and creeping thing and fowls of the air. For it repenteth me that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Now this antediluvian time period before the flood, from the time that the earth was created until the flood happened, supposedly is 1,656 years. And Adam lived for 900 of that. So Adam knew almost everybody that had been born. And I did see a thing that said that Eve's name basically means mother of all creation, or mother of life, basically.
Yeah.
So she was mother to apparently more than just Cain and Abel and Seth.
Well, I get from that Mother Earth, or Mother, what did you call it? Mother of what?
Mother of life.
Well, because she would be the one that has the first child, right?
Yeah, and then there's the theory that Jesus was the first man. and that Adam was Jesus. I've seen a lot of that. And he talks about having a wife and a marriage ceremony and coming back for his wife at some point. And I've seen a lot of people talking about that in the end times, in this rapture time, that he's coming back for his wife. And I've even seen people on TikTok that believe they are Jesus's wife and he's coming back for them.
Jesus' bride is the right,
Huh?
Brother Sam?
Yeah,
Brother
the
Sam?
bride of Christ
Is
that's
the
talked about
church.
in the New Testament is the church.
Right.
Paul's pretty plain about that.
Yeah,
Not some woman.
right. So you got some far-fetched.
Even the parable of the virgins that Jesus gives was pretty plain about when he comes back for his bride too.
Mm-hmm.
The 10 virgins.
Yes.
Another interesting thing that I wanted to touch on was that passage I read from Genesis 5, that he fashioned them in his likeness. So, okay, let's say these people are, let's say there's less oxygen on the earth, canopy theory. They are the megalodons of the shark world, okay? They're megalodons could eat Jaws like it was a minnow. This is how big those sharks used to be. We've got horseflies that have a wingspan of 10 inches. We got beetles that are 15 inches long, right? These things all existed. We've got sloths that can reach to the top of a 20-foot tree and lick the leaves out of the trees. So let's say human beings were, I've heard, up to 60 feet tall. Let's say that's crazy. 60 feet tall. That's big. If God made them in his image, maybe God's huge and he made them like he was, and then the decay started to begin. He had 1,500 years of people shrinking smaller. Now the Cherokees have that flood myth. Cherokees also have a myth about famine and disease, pestilence. And in this story, they talk about how all the characters you hear about, like rabbit, deer, bear, wolf, all these characters that are in the Cherokee myths, it says that they were all, the original ones were much bigger than the ones we have today. The ones we have today are like miniature versions, but the original ones were much bigger. And I talk about this with the kids in my Cherokee class. Are we evolving and getting better, or did we devolve? If you look at this picture right here, this is what it would be like if they were 15 feet tall compared to us today. I believe, and you can look around, people are getting dumber. We're not evolving. We're not getting better. Everyone is getting stupider by the day. Technology is making it to where we don't evolve anymore because we have technology to assist us. So we're not challenged enough for our physical bodies to need to adapt. People are less.
I'll disagree with you there, because you're talking about, using your mental capacities on technology that's only been around for, 20 years. But in a lot of cases, evolution has caused a lot of creatures to get smaller to adapt to their surroundings. Like there's theories about islands, like in around India or off in the Indian Ocean, in that area, about elephants they found on islands that were much, much smaller because they had to evolve to the environment. Kind of like how fish can only get as big as their environment. If you have a fish in like a goldfish gets loose in Grand Lake, it can get big.
It's still not a better elephant than a woolly mammoth.
Right, but it's evolved to its surroundings. And, talk about people shrinking from, whether they be 10 feet, 15 feet down to 6 feet in a matter of less than 2,000 years, when we have studies that show people, 1,000 years ago were on average much shorter than us now.
Huh.
Another thing to think about along that line is I saw a study about Neanderthal skulls that we think about Neanderthals like this guy has a really high ridge line, like eyebrow line, and they're actually finding out now that these skulls were not even a different species. Some of them are actually humans. The deal is they were super old. Like this bone right here never stops growing. And so if you live to be 900 years, this bone would be huge and protrude out from your head. So a lot of these Neanderthals, maybe they're not Neanderthals at all. Possibly they're 900-year-old humans, because every time you chew, you're making this area grow, and this area right here can grow really massive due to chewing for so much. And they said that their brain capacity, bigger brain capacity, also was not because they were different species, but because they grew to live so long. Their brains grew for 800 years.
I do think to some part of it, we probably are de-evolving a bit, because we may have better book smarts, but we sure don't have a lot better street smarts with things. But I think that is part of, evolution or adaptation, whatever you want to use for it. I mean, you go through the history books that talks about whenever the settlers came to America, the American counterparts were taller, stronger, and healthier than the European counterparts just after a generation.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
What I like to talk about is, a lot of people, when they think about Noah filling the ark with all the animals. Today, if you took how many types of animals there are today and you put them on the ark, boy, you better have, a metropolitan zoo times 10 or 100 even. It'd be crazy. It'd be impossible for a man to round up that many animals. But if you think about him saving one male and one female of each species, maybe he didn't keep 10 kinds of dog. He probably didn't have every Chihuahua and every English bulldog and every terrier. He probably had a wolf, one type of wolf, one type of dog, and that dog led to all the other species. And a lot of people say, well, it's impossible for that many dogs to have come from a wolf, but they actually have studies that show that you can have a lot of different species in just a couple of 100 years. And the thing is, the way I think about it is, like, if every cat came from a common ancestor, it was probably something like a saber-toothed tiger, and it became a tiger and a lion later. And so you only had to have one cat, and he probably had one dog. So it was like a wolf and a saber-toothed tiger, and those things devolved into the Chihuahua and the hairless cats we have today.
Because all of those are genetic breeding,
Right?
just like food. You just.
But I'm saying they're not better.
See what happens.
There's no way to make them better than a wolf, though. The best thing it was what it originally was, and none of this new shit is anywhere near as good as what it came from.
But your domestic dog has muscles in its eyes that wolves don't have. They can give you when your dog looks at you and gives you the puppy dog eyes, wolves don't have the muscles to do that.
There was only one nationality on the ark too.
Well, they all
had to come from that.
Yeah. And there are a lot of different, flood stories from all over. Maybe they all had similar events happening.
We're just about out of time. I wanted to talk about this last thing here. I found this guy, I talked about him before. This guy's name is Daryl Anka, and he claims that he is channeling a spirit from another world called Bashar, and people asking questions and he answers. And I don't know if you guys can hear it. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear this.
Does the Yukon have any particular like species of
Yeah.
extraterrestrial that hangs out there more than
It has
others?
large groups of Sasquatch.
Yes, thank you. You know how many people up there are just going to want to hug you for saying that? So the Sasquatch, are they related to like Cro-Magnon? There's a lot of stories about that.
They are mostly related to the idea of the early naturally evolved hominids on your planet that you refer to as Homo habilis,
Oh, interesting.
Homo erectus.
Cool.
The idea of the ancient extraterrestrials called the Anu, who arrived on your planet hundreds of thousands of years ago, and used some of those early hominid beings to inject genetic material in them and create Homo sapiens, did not necessarily use every branch of the hominid. The ones that were not altered by extraterrestrial genetics continue to evolve into what you now understand to be Sasquatch. Therefore, they are the naturally evolved hominid of the Earth. If the extraterrestrials had not altered the DNA of some of the Homo habilis, Homo erectus beings, today you would all be Sasquatch. But they have evolved to the point where they understand how to use interdimensional vortices, and that's why they're so difficult to find.
That's also what the First Nations
Yes.
teach up there.
They call it slipwalking.
Hmm.
They can slip from one reality to another.
Is there a whistling? People talk about them whistling.
Yes, sometimes that's part of their language.
Fascinating.
There is one particular female Sasquatch in that area that the information on which has actually been downloaded into the channel for his use in his novels. The name of that female Sasquatch is Tsemiquest. Tsemiquest.
Anyway, so that guy just said that Sasquatches are the original hominids of Earth, and we are all genetically altered. Which, if you are a fan of Ancient Aliens, there's a lot of biblical references to the Nephilim and the Watchers and these beings that come down and mix their seed with the sons of man. So it's possible these angels, if they're aliens, maybe they did procreate with us, but we originally maybe were Bigfoots. So maybe Adam and Eve were a Bigfoot. I don't know.
Okay.
I like to think that there are maybe like several different species of humans, and just like, you know, all the species of elephants just all died out. And the ones that interbred managed to carry on their DNA, but we're about the only thing left.
Yeah.
It's the reason why.
Because isn't there like, you know, you've got your Caucasoid, your Negroid, and your Mongoloid.
Skull types. That's a
yeah.
skull type. There's a suture that goes through the middle of your skull, and there's only so many of those.
Was there a fourth one?
Actually, in Africa, the people of Africa have 3 different ones. They're the most diverse in the world. Caucasians have one. They call them Caucasoids. There's Mongoloids, and then I want to say there's 3 in Africa. So there's 5.
Okay.
I think once we get this global warming over with and melt the ice caps, we'll find amazing things in Antarctica.
Oh,
They
you
say
know
it's
it.
melting. I've been hearing on TikTok it's 90 degrees, not something like 90 degrees above normal or something down there.
Which is probably still well below zero.
Mhm. Yeah.
So what are we going to talk about next week? Do we want to talk about maybe who Adam's other wife was? Do we want to talk about giants? Maybe the angels, the what they call them?
I thought we've had a discussion about like Niflheim and stuff.
Yeah, we have talked about that before.
Yeah.
I
How
don't
about
remember.
the flood? Have we talked about the flood?
You mean
I don't
after?
think so.
I think we
After
did talk about it a little bit.
'Cause,
We talked
you know
about
me, I'll go off on some tangent about, you know, Ice Age and
Yeah, I'm showing all of our past topics, and actually, this is only half our past topics.
Yeah,
We started a new website about.
You still
how
got the video up.
Huh?
You still got the video up.
Video.
That's all I see. All I see is the video. That old man. If you're trying to show us something
Oh,
different.
sorry.
I better get off here, guys. I got people waiting on me.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
Thanks for letting me be a
Talk to you
part of it
guys.
again, okay?
Talk to you next week.
Yeah.
See you next week. All right.
All right. Bye.
All right.
Kim?
So yeah.
Where I get confused in our history, the world's history, is because I would sit in the Xena Baptist Church. You know, we were supposedly having a Bible study with starting with first there was the light or something like that. You know, they were going through the Bible verse by verse. But when I ask anything about the dinosaur period or anything like that, it was like, no, I think it was Jim Hale that mentioned, he said that, you know, there's no reason to think, I mean, that this is the only earth, the only world. And he started on something like that, you know, but the other people sitting out there was like, well, you just forget about the dinosaurs or something like that. And it was just like it was supposed to be unspoken of. And I want to know why. Because you can go, especially when you go in, you know, out west, you know, and you see the imprints of, what do you call it? Hieroglyphics or whatever you call it. The imprints on the stones and in the water beds and stuff like that. There's proof that, you know, of course, this was the flood that covered all this at one time, but now you can see that. But why?
I'll tell you one problem, Mom. A lot of the dinosaur skeletons that they have in museums were just bone. They only have pieces of the bones, and they reconstructed the rest. Like I saw a deal about the T-Rex, and all they had was like one bone in its leg, and they recreated all the rest of it.
Well,
Like,
too is like
huh?
when you talk about, like, you know, you try to talk about the subjects in church. It's like when you and I were kids. They don't have answers for that, so they don't want to talk about it. They want to just no, don't worry about that. We aren't
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
But
Well, just like I had asked the question, Robert. Okay, so if they had the flood, and then when they landed and they started rebuilding whatever, and they said that the people started, I mean it was family, but they started arguing about among themselves about how to do things. And so some of the people would break off because, you know, I mean, I don't know how much time this was after they landed when and started rebuilding, how many years went by. But I asked something about, well, who did they marry? Or like even when Cain killed Abel.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where did he go off to and all this kind of stuff? And it's like back Lois Pitts told me, she said it's not uncommon for back in those days for people to be married to cousins or even sisters.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, it's kind of weird.
I saw there's a timeline right here. There's a family chart, and you can see these people are breeding with each other.
But if you think about, like, unless their DNA was different than ours, you would have gotten some horrible inbreeding. Because there's a case in Europe about, I think it was in Spain, the worst case of recorded inbreeding. This guy was royalty, and, you know, to keep the royal blood going, this guy had massive protruding chin, sloped forehead, and just looked awful.
Ew.
But
yeah,
I mean, it's like my own theory, you know, and I don't try to take away from anybody else's beliefs, but just my own trying to understand it would be like if Noah's flood was more localized. And, you know, that area, that's why I've been always fascinated with, you know, the Ice Age, and listen to a guy, Randall Carlson, he talks a lot about it. And if some massive event happened to where a deluge of water came into that area, then, you know, a lot of those people, that was their whole world. You know, they didn't really go much farther than that. So if they see for as far as the eye can see, everything's underwater, they may just figured the entire world was underwater.
Yeah.
Mount Everest has clamshells on top of it, massive ones that are closed. And anyone that's walked on the beach knows that as soon as a clam dies, it opens up. You hardly ever find closed clams on the beach. So that means that they were buried instantly alive on top of
But how old were? But the Himalayas are some of the youngest mountains on Earth.
Right. This is my point. If you look at the map, there used to be a continent, Lemuria, south of India, and this continent sunk underneath the water and smashed into India, pushing the whole subcontinent up into Asia, forming the Himalayas, and at the same time push all the sand and water all over the Middle East and the Sahara. And none of that sand was there before that flood, I believe.
Well, you know, I'm not arguing with that. I'm just adding to your point. Was on Joe Rogan. He's got this guy, Randall Carlson, brilliant guy. You should listen to him if you haven't. He talks a little bit about his theory about Atlantis, and there's a plateau in the Atlantic Ocean. He says due to geological events, would have been catastrophic. The entire plateau sank. You know, and you can see, and he shows graphs and stuff of this kind of a mountain range in the Atlantic Ocean. He says at one time he believes it was above the sea level, but due to, you know, geological events and crust moving, it basically sank. And that could have been, you know, about the same time as, or maybe not the same time as the Himalayas were formed, but a similar event.
Okay, I have just a couple more points I want to get in real quick before we get off here. One thing I forgot to talk about was if the months were years, whenever they talked about Enoch being 65 years old whenever he had Methuselah, if you do the math on that, 65 divided by 12 is 5.4. So that means that Enoch would have been 5 years old whenever he had his first child. So that's definitely not true. And then right here, this is
It could happen to a female, but I don't think a male. Because there was a recorded event. I've seen pictures of a little girl who was like 5 years old, but bad things, she was raped and stuff.
Well, here's a Bible timeline that claims that it can go all the way from Adam to Christ, and all the years are perfectly lined up. And if
I see is,
you guys don't see,
I can't see it. All I see is that old man on the video.
Yeah, that's all I see.
I wonder why that's happening.
Sasquatch man.
I closed that video out on my screen. I don't even have it open anymore. I hope it's not going to be on the video because I've been showing stuff on the screen.
I bet it's going to be on the video because you're recording.
Well, that's weird. Resume share. Oh, there we go. There's a button that said resume share.
Now I see Lilith.
Okay, so this is a Bible timeline, and it shows they've calculated all the years between Adam and Christ, and you can actually go all the way through What were you asking, Mom, about? You asked about a certain person.
A certain person? I did?
Yeah, you were asking about how long did they live? Like Seth lived 105 years, Seth was 105 years when he begat Enos. So all of these guys right here all knew each other. There's Noah. Noah was
Here's
600 years old.
Another question is what, if this timeline was based more on a Hebrew Bible of the time, because when we think about it, we always associate with our current calendar, which was based on Roman, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if they had a different way of measuring years,
That's true.
It was all based
seasons
on
are
cycles of the
seasons, but-
moon. It was all based on cycles of the moon, and it was the Gregorian calendar that changed that. The Julian calendar, I'm not sure what it was like before that, but there's a guy named Michael Rood that I've talked about in the past that has a Jewish calendar where he can mathematically with computers now, you can reverse engineer the map based on moon cycles of when the Sabbath was hitting, and he can actually determine the minute that Jesus was crucified based on it being in conjunction with the barley harvest and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, because I wonder, given thousands of years ago,
Yeah.
what the unit of measurement they use for annual calendars.
I'm pretty sure that was another thing is that I saw that people were talking about prehistory. Prehistory is actually a very recent idea. Really, it's only been around for 60 years or something like that. The idea of prehistory, because everyone before that, there's no such thing as prehistory, because we have a history book that tells us everything all the way back to when the sun and the moon were created. So there is no, before everyone was obsessed with science and tossed away the Bible as truth. Everyone believed that there was no such thing as prehistory, because we know everything all the way back to the minute we were created.
Yeah.
But I think most prehistory goes to, before we actually started keeping track, which would have been, a couple thousand years ago during the Roman era, probably Greeks.
Here's another thing to think about. What if the earth looked like this? Can you see my screen now?
Yeah.
What if before the flood that there was no water anywhere and there was no ocean? And so if it had never rained and it was just mist everywhere, the whole earth could have looked like a big bumpy asteroid. And then whenever the rains came and flooded, then it completely covered the entire earth. That's kind of an interesting thing to think about.
Well, didn't they say, like in the Bible, doesn't it say when the rain started, it was coming out of the sky and out of the ground?
Yeah, there was another thing. It said fountains of the deep. And there are some people that believe that the rift in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean is actually the place where the water broke open. And the guy studied plate tectonics and stuff. So he acknowledges that the earth is moving around and that, that it really is shifting on that, it basically does a motion like this and creates new soil from underneath the mantle. But he believes that original water was actually shooting out of the ground from underneath the earth.
I mean, it could be, because a lot of people believe that it never once rained before Noah's flood.
And there was people talking about the rainbow, whether or not there was ever a rainbow if it hadn't rained. And they basically confirmed that, yes, you can have rainbows with mist. And they had to have known what a rainbow was in order to say what it was, or something like, some logical argument like that.
Hmm.
Okay, so what are we going to talk about next week? We're going to talk about dinosaurs in the Bible.
to me, I'd like to even talk about the period of that man, the Neanderthal man, and because there's different names for them. Did they roam the earth during the dinosaur period? And if they, what's considered a man or a human? I mean, it's not a human, right?
I think that kind of gets into some gray area because you had like eventually Homo sapien, then Homo sapien sapien, which would be the stage we're at now. And then you had all those other stages of, what would have been considered, I guess, apish humans. But given like, would you talk about when we kind of become what we are?
Yeah, I just don't understand all that. I mean, I'm just ignorant. It's just like, okay, we know supposedly that they were here. What happened to them is along with the dinosaurs, like the environment changed or what?
Yeah, because I don't believe that we were there with the dinosaurs, but like, when you consider dinosaurs, like in the timeline, we're closer to the Tyrannosaurus Rex than what the Tyrannosaurus Rex was to the Stegosaurus. There's just a massive, huge time frame there.
Yeah.
If carbon dating is correct, and if those dinosaurs even had their bones put together right, and there's a lot of
the problem with the dinosaurs was like back in the 1800s. There's an archaeologist that was on Joe Rogan. He talks a lot about that because he talks about this guy that is trying to debunk it all. And he's like, the problem is back in the 1800s, there was two big archaeologists and they were in a race competing with each other, and they would just find stuff. It didn't even have to be bones of the same dinosaur. They would just find them, put them together and say, hey, I found a new dinosaur. And it was a race between them two. Like, I think when they found out later on, like the Brontosaurus apparently never existed. It was just a conglomeration of bones.
right,
And like
stuff like that.
That guy talks about the guy that's trying to debunk big archaeology. He's saying, like, if you go to the museum and look at a dinosaur, it's not even real. And the archaeologist is like, he's right, because the real bones are so fragile that if you sneezed on them, you could disintegrate them. So
Wow.
all the dinosaur bones you see in the museum are exact replicas of the bones. So that way they can make replicas of them and then put them together.
It's also interesting that we call them dinosaurs and we lump them all into one category when they're actually a whole bunch of different species that probably have nothing to do with each other.
Well, yeah, there were a whole bunch of different timelines. Like that, like I said, like Stegosaurus lived in a different timeline.
Pretty
than,
sure
like,
I read somewhere that someone invented the word dinosaur and it wasn't very long ago.
I think it's a combination of Greek words, like
But I
terrible
think people
lizard.
didn't put those Greek words together until like 120 years ago.
Yeah,
Something like
yeah, I think it was like the 1800s when all of this started.
all right.
And that
Well,
guy talks, but there's some good stuff on Joe Rogan with Randall Carlson, and I can't remember the archaeologist's name, but if you check him out, they've got a lot of good information.
Well, being Sunday is Easter Sunday, do you want to do something on Monday night?
let's just skip next week and let's take 2
Okay.
weeks and let's study dinosaurs.
Okay. And Robert, if you wanted to go to church on Easter Sunday, we start at 10:30 out there. I think you would enjoy hearing Sam.
He's funny.
Yeah, I like Sam.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, Tiffany's yelling at me. I got to work that weekend. I'm on call.
Oh, okay.
And Maddie's coming in this week. Next
Oh,
week.
cool.
Matt
Great.
Kaylin's Caitlin's supposed to go fly out, meet her in Seattle. They're going to spend a couple days and then come home.
How cool. That's awesome. Okay.
All right. I hear Bella messing around in there. I'm gonna go talk to her. So yeah, next week we're unlocking the truth about dinosaurs.
Nothing until we come for
yeah,
2 weeks, right?
2 weeks. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Y'all have
All
a
right.
good week.
You too.
All right. Bye
See you
bye.
later.
Bye.